Hello and welcome to the EMS Handoff podcast. This is David, and along with my co-hosts Bradley Dean and Eric McCullough, we are your source for all things EMS. Tonight, we welcome another distinguished guest that is bringing forward a topic around the country, around the globe, and just in the EMS professions in itself. So we're going to get to that here in just a minute, but before we do, we're going to go to, just in case we lose him, because he's playing the medic this evening, Bradley Dean, protecting North Carolina at its best. How are things going?
It's going great. The weather's been wonderful here. I am having to work tonight a little bit. And of course, our supervisor just walked in too. So I'm sure he's probably wondering what I'm doing at the kitchen table.
Now is the time where they're going to sit behind the camera and just start to make funny faces at you, those kind of things, just to give you a little EMS house fun there. So, well, we're going to cut it to the other side of the state and go to Nashville, or outside of Nashville. Eric McCullough doing everything he can.
Yeah. So this has been an awesome week. Not just, temperatures have kind of been wonky, but besides that, it's been great. We did our first giveaway for the EMS Challenge coins with Platinum Education, the EMS Handoff Challenge coins. By the time this thing airs, hopefully we'll have another giveaway going on, either with a trivia contest or something. We got some other stuff coming up. So hopefully people are either on our Instagram account or our Facebook group, so they can follow us there, and especially our YouTube. We need to get a lot more people watching the YouTube. That's how they can actually see us instead of just listening to us as they go. They can actually put the YouTube, minimize it if you have to, put it over on the side so you can kind of listen to it and go off of that as well. So I had to put that out there.
So excellent point there. And take a look at coming up soon, as Eric was mentioning there, we're going to be dealing with these live quiz sessions coming up, partnered with Platinum and Pursue Outfitters. We're going to go Pursue here in just a minute, but potential to get some EMS handoff gear that way. So make sure to take a look for those quiz sessions partnered with Platinum coming up soon. But before we introduce our guest this evening, we'd like to thank our podcast partner, the Journal of Emergency Medical Services. They've been a tremendous partner to the EMS Handoff podcast. While the EMS Handoff serves as your source for all things EMS and the podcast first, JEMS has been an industry leader in the profession for many years. Go to their website and support their efforts to keep the industry informed. And also check out our fellow JEMS podcast hosts talking on a variety of subjects. We've got AJ Hyman and so different chiefs out there doing some great things. So make sure to check out their recently expanded podcast platform as well. They're going to be on Google, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Additionally, we'd like to make sure to remind you to go visit the EMS Handoff merchandise line of apparel with our apparel partner, Pursue Outfitters. The EMS Handoff podcast is partnered with Pursue to offer comfortable, stylish EMS Handoff gear. We have our t-shirts, one I got the red. I really like the red one. And but we got t-shirts, long sleeve shirts, and hoodies. Make sure to visit them at pursueoutfitters.com/EMS Handoff. We've got multiple colors. Go out there and choose. You also support Love 146 to end human trafficking every time you buy one of our shirts. So it's time to get started for this evening. Bradley, go ahead and introduce our next guest and let us get started.
So tonight we've got Doug Hexel. He's been in emergency services since 2004, working for private, commercial, and municipal agencies throughout the New York state. He currently serves as a firefighter-paramedic for the City of Schenectady, a rescue medical specialist for New York Urban Technical Search and Rescue, which is New York Task Force 2. But he's a paramedic instructor at the State University of New York at Coble, and he's a shift commander at Albany County Sheriff's Office EMS Division, where he's also a Lead Police Academy Instructor. He's a certified instructor coordinator and holds technician level certification in rope, confined space, trench, Swiftwater, and collapse rescue. And we've had some very good discussions over the last couple of weeks. Doug, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate you bringing me on to talk about this topic. I'm very passionate about it, as you know. So love to get more exposure to it.
So, Doug, let's go ahead and just jump right in. We talked about rescue medicine, talking about rescue medicine tonight. So most of the time what we see is our medical units on one side, fire rescue on the other. These guys come take care and hand off and go, right? But we're kind of talking about patching those together and seeing how things work. So kind of introduce us into this topic and we'll get started.
Sure. So one of the things that I always say, it's kind of one of my themes, is that, gone are the days of rescuers swiftly dragging patients out to awaiting medical staff or emergency medical services. EMS really needs to be involved from the very beginning of the rescue situation and be involved throughout. And depending on the scenario, being involved generally means being next to your patient, providing patient care for the extent of the operation. We really don't see that very often, because a lot of places, and I know Bradley and I are both fortunate where, we're the ALS agencies that conduct the rescue in our municipalities, but in a lot of places you may get a commercial or a third service or a hospital-based ambulance where you have people with very little rescue training. And then you've got the fire department or, whatever rescue agency you have who are, well-trained, well-versed in the technical side of the rescue, but not so much the medical side. So it's really about integrating the two and bringing the two together to have the best outcome. It doesn't matter if you can free that victim from a pile of rubble, if as soon as you free them, they die. You need to be able to provide care throughout the whole scenario to basically make it a rescue versus a recovery operation.
So let's, coupling with that definition, let's go ahead and talk into a specific scenario. So most common that we see out there is motor vehicle collisions. We'll start there and we'll kind of go into some of the different ones and see where you want to go. But so my understanding, the way you're thinking, and I'm going straight off this conversation because coming off the fire side as a firefighter paramedic, I found myself in the vehicles quite more frequently. So basically what you're saying is integrate with that team. It may not be necessarily that you're doing the vehicle extrication, but you're part of that team. You're in with that patient in a safe environment, right? Am I thinking of your definitions correctly?
Yeah, and unfortunately, that environment's not always safe. More than likely, it's not safe. And that's something that's also drilled into EMS providers is scene safety. And one of the kind of understandings that you have to take into rescue medicine is that the scene's not always going to be safe. One of the we worked a collapse about 3 years ago. A structural collapse about 90 minutes away from here. We responded with Task Force 2, and we were in the building next door that the original building had fallen on top of. And we were in a wildly dangerous place where we had deflection in our gold struts when we were done with it. Meaning we had hundreds of thousands of pounds pushing down on the floor above us because we had a live victim and we had to get that victim out. And you go into rescues with the understanding that the scene may not always be safe, which is very much against our training and background purely in EMS. So motor vehicle accidents, yes, that's our most common technical rescue. It's the most common place that we're going to be in. Even out in the field, working on the side, I've had a lot of side jobs working strictly EMS, and I've gotten there and gone to get in the car and whoa, hold on, what do you think you're doing? We'll get him out, we'll bring him to you. No, I need to get in the car and check him out. Oh, we got an EMT in there with him. I need to get in there. I need to do a patient assessment, and it a lot of times it's all depends on the people you're working with. And, sometimes the personalities of those people, focus more on the low frequency, high risk operations like a trench rescue or a collapse rescue. people that don't want paramedics accessing a patient in a motor vehicle accident certainly aren't going to want a paramedic to access a patient in those scenarios. But it's really necessary, especially in prolonged rescue operations, to have ALS level care. And with the task force, we travel with the physician, have a physician level care there.
So, let's kind of take it back to basically the initial level of education when we talk about this. And this is where we really get into the idea of the golden hour and the platinum 10 minutes. And we know those two kind of time frames back from the initial education requirements are really kind of guidelines. And they're that indication that, trauma is a surgical disease. The idea is we need to get them from wherever they are to that destination point within that hour. So this is kind of taking that and integrating a little bit more. Now, there are several, I say stumbling blocks. There's several walls that have to be broken down when we do this. And this is where we kind of get into that interoperability, more than just communications, but it is actually true interoperability. So if we're not tied to that specific agency, i.e. A fire that does fire and EMS transport, that their people are cross-trained. This is kind of getting into, as you said, public or private that may be separate, and saying, all right, guys, the ultimate goal is the patient, and we understand your role is stabilization and such. Mine is the same thing, just with the patient. And so if we work cooperatively, we can then take on that environment and say, okay, we're safe. Now, some of those blocks that we kind of see is, one, the understanding of what each other's mission is. But two, there are some limitations on the EMS side that need to be considered, because most EMS agencies, and we saw Bradley in the pre-show with his camera on for just a minute, and he had his nice reflective uniform shirt on and pants. He may or may not, but most EMS agencies, they provide uniform shirt, pants, boots, and that's it. So getting inside of a vehicle being cut down for that extrication, they may not have the appropriate gear. So kind of talk through when we're looking at this, how can we overcome some of these obstacles to this integration?
So knowing what's around you is a good way. Your agency specifically may not have personnel trained in rescue or equipped for that matter, especially commercial agencies. A lot of them may provide a kind of one size fits all turnout coat that was, made in 1992 and smells because it sits behind the driver's seat of the ambulance, and you're pretty sure there's some pizza sauce on it. Somebody got on there probably 2 years ago. And I understand that's the PPE situation in a lot of places. But there are surrounding areas that have those capabilities. That collapse I was just talking about a couple of years ago was a good example, where it was a career fire department that runs BLS first response and has a ALS commercial ambulance. They told the commercial paramedic, obviously, you don't have any sort of gear or anything like that, just stay out here. They called the neighboring fire department, which is full ALS career department. And that was the paramedic that made contact. And that was the paramedic that actually carried out care throughout the 4.5 hours, with us assisting essentially. So even if your agency specifically doesn't have that capability, there are surrounding agencies around here where I live. The town of Colony, which may ring a bell for some people because John Polite has set it up as kind of one of the first municipal, dedicated standalone third EMS service in New York about 30 some odd years ago. They have rescue capability, and when I'm at Albany County Sheriff's working there at my side job, we do not have, we have high angle, we have rope capability because we have a large state park that has a very active recreational climbing scene. So we do handle the search and rescue there. But if we have any other sort of technical event, I'm going to be calling mutual aid from the town of Colony immediately, and they're going to respond with their heavy rescue truck and probably 4 or 5 paramedics who are trained to a minimum of operations level, and knowing your surrounding area and getting an agency there who's equipped to provide rescue medical care until this is a more widely accepted thing, and we train people the way we should.
So I think one of the biggest areas as far as national attention that this has received here recently would be kind of the movement of active shooter response from the wait until the entire scene is cleared to actually having a team that goes in, that once a line pushes forward, they can come in and start to triage and transport some of those individuals, kind of increasing that time. Because as we know, in some of these situations, we'll say a shooting, and unfortunately there's obviously been several here recently. The access to tourniquets is a critical thing to stop some of that bleeding. And yet, with active shooter situations going through school environments or business environments, the number of rooms, the number of places within, it could take potentially hours upon hours before they get the whole institution cleared or the whole location cleared. And therefore, that 5, 6, 10 minutes that a person may have before they bleed out is gone, and there's absolutely no chance of survival. So one of the things that I know that there's going to be some people that kind of take a listen to this and say, hey, I'm on the EMS unit and I am trained in active shooter entry situations, or I'm trained in vehicle extrication, I'm trained in collapse, trench rescue, etc. But their agencies don't support that. So one of the things that those individuals have to do is, prior to those incidents actually ever taking place, they need to start working within their organizations that advocating for this and saying, hey, look, we understand that it's not our mission currently. Our mission currently is providing that EMS transport, but we're seeing multiple calls within our jurisdiction or even our surrounding agencies that say, hey, we've got trained people. Let us start to put together teams and start to provide this and advocate from within, right?
Absolutely. And getting out and training with your local areas is crucial to that. And knowing the agencies and the personnel in those agencies around you, and integrated training, even training among, even if you're a fully equipped agency and the neighboring agencies fully equipped, training with them to again, our goal is the best possible outcome for our patient. And I don't think anybody on either side of that would disagree that, we want to carefully and quickly extricate this patient from whatever situation they're in, but we want them to survive. So in order that for a lot of them to survive, then yes, we need to integrate medical care into the rescue phase. And it goes back to education. What actually got me into all of this, got me into this training when I joined Task Force 2, I joined as a rescue specialist. Just strictly, I say Mongo, just break stuff, lift stuff, move stuff, rescue people, and let the medical people do their thing. And they said, hey, kind of more or less, you're a paramedic. We're gonna kind of dual credential you to also fill a medical specialist role. And I started looking more into it. And at that time, we were treating it as a sort of separate entity, not actively involved in the rescue phase. But there was a transition to actually integrating the rescue medical capabilities into the actual rescue phase. But anyway, while I was taking that training to become a rescue specialist, I had to become technician level everything. And we're actually fortunate that one of the guys who wrote the NFPA and wrote the entire curriculum for New York State for rope rescue was my instructor for my rope technician course. And I mean, 80-hour course. And we were talking, he was clicking through the slides real quick and came across suspension injury. And it was something that I remembered, hearing about in medic school and then, later teaching in medic school. I know what the operations section of our national education requirement is. And he skipped over it real quick. He goes, suspension syndrome, that's something you got to be worried about. Next slide. And I raised my hand and said, well, hold on. I've heard some people say that the whole W position is out. We're not doing that anymore. And his exact response was, the F if I know, I'm not a paramedic. And, obviously he didn't say F, but I went, wow. Like, I mean, you quite literally wrote the book on this. And, and I didn't call him out in front of the class by any means, but afterwards I said, like, hey, on this committee, like who was on this? I'm curious. And he started naming some names and the rope nuts would know some of those names. And I'm like, doctors, paramedics. And he's like, I think so-and-so was a medic, when he was with the fire department. And like that's a problem from the very, very top down. And like I said, teaching in a paramedic program now, I know what the national education standard looks like for operations. I know what our presentations look like. I know what the textbooks look like. It's usually the thinnest chapter in the textbook. Ambulance operations or ambulance, ambulance operations, and then the rescue operations. Those are the two smallest chapters. One of them we do the most, the ambulance operations, but the actual rescue operations, there's not a whole lot to it. I don't know of many places that actually do any sort of hands-on operations training like that during paramedic school. Again, my program, we're very fortunate we do. There's another member of Task Force 2 who's on the staff at the college that I teach at. And he was actually a task force leader and a battalion chief in City of Albany Fire Department. His name's Gio Henderson. And he puts them through several lab scenarios on technical rescue response and operations and treating patients during the rescue phase. I also do a couple. So we actually do some hands-on training in my program. But, having taught other places, there's not a lot that do. So from the very, top down, our national education standards on the EMS side, our NFPA on the fire side, they really kind of neglect each other, where there's not enough operations training for EMS. There's not enough EMS training for operations. And we need to do something about getting them on the same page. FEMA's got the medical specialist course is a really great sort of bridge between the two, but that is, essentially reserved for rescue specialist, or USAR medical specialists like myself, or USAR physicians. We're fortunate our physician, Sean Donovan, our medical team manager, he went to the FEMA medical specialist course. So he's a full-fledged FEMA doc now. But it's really few and far between. It's an extremely expensive class. You have 2 places in the country that you can take it, down at TEACS in Texas or Disaster Medical Solutions in Florida. Every once in a while, you'll see the class, elsewhere, but it's for, California Task Force 1 or something like that, is taking the class, or they had a class at FDNY's MSOC a couple of years ago. And that was basically reserved for urban search and rescue medical specialists. So what we really need to see is we need to see that class come together like a rescue task force, like you were talking about, something to cover all the bases essentially.
So we're talking about advocating, baking in the medical response in with the rescue response, which is cool because I came from a place where there were 2 different things. Even if you did have an EMT or a paramedic on a rescue, their scope was more, I'm the rescue guy right now. the paramedic guys waiting wherever. So do you have, and this is, I think, timely too, since there may be hopefully more states coming on board with making EMS an essential service, which opens us up more to training, resources and things like that. Do you have references, resources that people can go to that can like prove that, hey, this is a viable, this is viable training, and this is viable resources that we can devote to our personnel?
I mean, look at the big cities. That's probably the best way to say it. You've got rescue medics in New York City. You've got, heavy rescues in Pittsburgh and in Boston. And I mean, I'm more kind of isolated to the Northeast here. So those are the examples I'm using, but a lot of the bigger city areas where, if everybody had a budget like they did, maybe they'd be able to get those resources. But all of those agencies have, specific situations where they're going to use that for specialized response, essentially. In terms of, I'm a very academic guy. I'm thinking right now, I don't have any, I'd love to be able to give you like a study, but they don't exist. But I would say, look at the successes that other places have had with this.
Well, it's funny. We just talked to our statistician. I think that's how you say it. We did a statistics episode last week, and I'm like, that would be a good opportunity for any EMS folks out there who are looking for research opportunities to go into that. Because like you said, you can look at the big cities, talk to them. Bradley's talked about the DMS course, and just talking to some people. I think that would be a good place it sounds like it would be a good place to start. Like I said, I was never on the rescue end. We always had a fire department that allowed us, but I can see that point of care and the continuity of care being a valuable thing. And speaking of which, because you can get some good training, Bradley, you're alluding to the DMS course. You have some experience with it.
Yeah, so we worked with them. I want to say it was around 2007 through 2010, and set up and did a lot of logistic stuff in Charlotte. Charlotte Fire kind of hosted it at their academy. We'll tell you, that was lots of concrete. Lots of confined spaces, lots of breaching and breaking and shoring. We had a lot of fun, but for those of us that had done collapse before, doing the medical side in there was difficult. But I think a lot of our personnel that went through the DMS course took a lot away from
it. And do you think that there's like a hesitancy too with maybe medics being like, we're going to stay in our lane, and the rescue guys, they do what they do, kind of like very, I'd hate to say like almost tribalistic, like this is kind of our world, and rescue people, that's kind of their world. Do you see that? And that's Doug and Bradley, since you guys are both heavily involved in both worlds.
I feel like it was like that with tactical stuff probably 15 or 20 years ago. And, now every paramedic you see has a, cool flashy vest and tactical bag that they keep all their, 14 gauges stuck on the outside in case they have to, needle decompress somebody and save the second and a half of unzipping it. And, I feel like probably 15, 20 years ago, outside the big cities, maybe go back a little bit longer, 20, 25 years ago, you weren't seeing ballistic vests on every ambulance or anything like that. And now, I mean, they're everywhere. And I know plenty of providers who wear them all the time, wear them under their uniforms. The tactical side of thing was something, again, 20, 25 years ago that was kind of like, we're going to stay in our lane and the cops can bring them to us. But we've seen, these transitions and hopefully, EMS, new kids on the block. We're constantly evolving, and just like medicine has to, we're not bloodletting to get the demons out of the blood anymore. It's EMS evolved. That was only a couple hundred years ago. Who knows where we're going to be in 20 years from now.
So now, I'm going to make a bold statement, but I'm going to be very careful in how I say this. Rescue is not spelled EMS. However, there has to be a careful integration, and we need paramedics that are good paramedics to be good rescuers that understand the operation. They don't have to be specialists in everything, but to understand what's going on, the forces involved, and how that patient is going to have to be extracted, or even to be able to get in there and provide that care. Then they've got to be the technician. But if you're out there and you can do it, and you can link up with a team, that is an important thing if you can build that bridge.
Exactly. Like I was saying before, FDNY rescue medics. I did my paramedic school down there. One of my main lab instructors was a New York City rescue paramedic. They're trained to the operations level. They're not trained to the technician level. You heard during my bio, I'm trained to the technician level because I'm dual credentialed to do either. So I can set up shoring on my way in to get to a patient, but we don't expect all paramedics to do that. We don't expect any paramedics to do that really, outside of specialized response units like USAR teams. We expect them to understand, like you said, understand the forces involved, Bradley, and know basically what to do, medically for these patients, but they don't need to be building the shoring or knowing what walls to support or what beams to watch out for or anything like that. Simply training people to an operations level in these disciplines is more than sufficient.
So one of the things I'm going to take a stab at here is a lot of what we have discussed is based around your focus with the task force that you're assigned to. And here in Tennessee, we're very similar that we have the task force structure as well. Memphis Fire Department is one of those, or the Memphis area there, Tennessee Task Force 1. And a lot of times those task forces are specifically identified to larger areas that have a tremendous amount of resources. Like I said, that West Tennessee area in Memphis has one. We have Task Force 2, which is out of Nashville. I think they're still stood up. Again, a large area with multiple disciplines. This isn't necessarily, the conversation we're having here is not necessarily that task force structure. This is taking into look medicine really at any area. So when you take Tennessee's 95 counties, we really have a few that are relatively large counties. In fact, there are three main large counties. Chattanooga is coming up as a fourth. The Tri-Cities or Johnson County area is relatively large. But when we take a look at it, we can probably break down that we have 10 large counties and 85 more small counties, and then even outside of that, very rural counties. But we get into a lot of these places, and this medicine can be practiced at any of those, because we can be talking about farm rescues where we have large farm equipment, and we need to get into those. There's that stabilization that has to be done. So don't just take this as don't just take this as a Tennessee Task Force 1, the New York Task Force 1, 2, multiple up there. This is any county USA. New York City, dealing with large building collapses, or farm in Kansas City, right?
Absolutely. I've heard of the farm medic course. I've been interested in taking it. So, I got to tell you, I work in a large urban area now, but I used to work at an agency that did 1,000 calls a year for 600 some odd square miles. I've worked everywhere from rural surrounded. We literally rented a house that was surrounded by farms and built a big metal bay out back for the ambulance, up to working in a densely populated urban area where my truck got broken into in the parking lot not too long ago. It's this is for everybody. It's not for the, isolated to large urban areas. Now, I talk a lot about collapse. That's kind of our forte, where, everybody and their mother does hazmat. That's one of the USAR, kind of requirements, is we have to have dedicated hazmat assets. We never get called for that because everybody has a hazmat team. Even trench, a lot of areas have resources for trench. We don't get called all that often. It's collapse that speaking as from the task force side of things, that's really kind of our main use. But rural areas, absolutely. The FireMedic course, I don't know exactly what that contains, but we're talking about situations that could happen anywhere. That could happen to anyone. Tornadoes in rural areas are one of the leading causes of collapses, collapses with victims. You think that it's earthquakes on the coast, but it's really, residential areas where you've got a 2-story house now on top of a family because a tornado in rural Oklahoma. That's where you see those, and a lot of those even rural places that have a lot of this integrated training, or units that can combine and provide that medical resource in rescue scenarios. So no, it's definitely not just the big cities.
Now, I'm going to go back to one other area that you kind of mentioned earlier, and it was kind of associated with those entry level or initial level EMS education requirements there. We go back to those education standards that are out there. And as you mentioned, I wouldn't necessarily the smallest. One of the longest chapters, I just got done with an EMT class myself. One of the longest chapters as far as slides and everything is the hazmat, their terrorism response and hazmat, which one of the reasons for me is, and my students absolutely love when I say this, is I love terrorism. I love talking about that. It's one of my first military careers. My wife is in background in criminal justice and criminal justice education. And so we have plenty of conversations that probably have been picked up by the NSA about, we're talking, I'm on shift or whatever. We're talking about, hey, have you seen? And we kind of go into those. So mine ends up a little bit longer, but really most of this, as you said, the initial education only really takes into account to tell you basically what to stay away from. Even if we do get into some of those additional requirements, we do need to seek out additional, whether it's going to the DMS or TEACS for the medical specialist, or simply finding out, hazmat related courses, et cetera. We do need to expound upon our education, but we do need to have that proactive mentality that says, our goal is to help the patient. And so being in there in the safest environment possible, obviously, if the car is about to go off the side of the cliff, you do have to do some stabilization, et cetera, first. Hazmat, even those farm rescues where we get into some of the oxygen displacing gases that are there, or grain silos, et cetera. You have to be cautious, but go into this with a proactive mentality, seek out additional education, and look to push forward just a little bit, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah. And I talked about the initial training and the initial, your national education standards. We don't need to be training every single paramedic to be a rescue paramedic. I'm not saying that. I'd like to see more information disseminated. Going to another hot topic right now. 10 years ago, I'm sure if you had approached me 10 years ago and talked about community paramedicine, I would have said community what? Or what paramedicine? And now, 10 years later, it's everywhere. And it's really about providing the best service to our patients and to the people that pay our bills. And I hope that someday it's similar with rescue medicine, where, right now, not a lot of places are doing it. And again, not everybody's a community paramedic. I'm not a community paramedic. My agency just got approved for it. But we're not really doing anything with it yet, because it was just kind of fast tracked to get us out and vaccinating people. But not every paramedic's a community paramedic, and not every paramedic needs to be a rescue paramedic. But it's a position that we should have. You're on mute.
It's going to happen one time, every time. It never fails. Going from the task force perspective, and maybe a good thing to kind of get into. You've got some individuals out there that are like, hey, send me to every course possible. I want to do hazmat technician, vehicle technician, or extrication technician, and rope rescue, and Swiftwater rescue, and not all of them at the awareness level. They want to go and do it all. That necessarily may not be the best model, right?
No, definitely not. And again, I'm in a bit of a different situation, because again, I joined the task force. FEMA puts out a set of standards that every rescue specialist needs to be trained to, and you essentially need to be trained to every single discipline technical rescue. But we have people who specialize in things. Yes, I'm a technician in everything. If this is something involving water, and I've actually not too long ago, we got called out for a water rescue, and I was texting a friend of mine who is like he's actually a retired Army colonel, spent time in Ranger Battalion, infantry officer, and accomplished whitewater kayaker. I mean, all over the globe. He's older now, like in his 60s. Brad, I hope you don't see this, because you could still kill me. But he's a bit older now. And but I was texting him, asking him, about the conditions on this river, because I knew it was near where he lived, and because that's one of his specialties. Yes, I'm a jack of all trades, and hopefully a master of one, being the rescue medical side of things. But I still have a doctor to fall back on. We've got people who, it's a lot of, a term that I use, not so nicely usually, but paper rescuers, people who took the class and they have the certificate and they haven't done anything with it and don't know a whole lot about it. But they can do the skills if there's somebody there who's really knows what they're talking about. And that's more or less the way that we operate as well. We don't need people who have every single, certification. And I'm talking about myself here, because I do. But I'm not an expert in every single thing that I'm technician level in. But if I have somebody there who is an expert, who can, kind of guide me, then yeah, I can say, okay, yeah, I remember that. Yep. I remember that from class. I remember that from training. Yeah, I can do that. So yeah, I mean, we don't need the paper rescuers who have every single, discipline, but again, an operations level is a good start.
You mentioning that, I had a opportunity to go train in Fort Smith, Arkansas, and the Arkansas Civil Support Team, which is a joint Air Force Army unit that comes out during certain events. We got an opportunity to train with a major who used to be their science officer and got put in charge as their second in command. And he'll tell you, this guy's background is epidemiology, and all I know is whatever we're paying him is too little, because if he ever went to work for the enemy, we're all in trouble. But, this individual would tell you, he goes, I run this organization and the science side of it. He goes, but when it comes to this other stuff, I put it on them, because I don't. He goes, I know this. And he's like, I've done it for 45 years, is basically where he said he was. It's been his entire career, and they keep him around because of what he knows. But he's not going to tell you how to do this, that, or the other. It's up to you guys. You just bring it back to me. Now, within an organization, if we want to talk about this and expand this proliferate it within our organization. We get a group of people like we have here together. And kind of my background, I like hazardous materials, and I do like rescue. And I like that, so we're going to take that and play off that. And Doug, you may end up being, the ropes guy, and Bradley may be the Swiftwater guy, and Eric, and you kind of build that up. And, each one of us would, we'd go through the initial training, but those would be our subject matter experts within the organization. And so that's one way to proliferate that. So if you're in some of these smaller organizations, that may be, this is a grassroots a movement that we could build up and say, hey, we want to do this. We want to push forward, and let us investigate, find those classes, find the money for them. Because as Bradley mentioned earlier, they were able to go through DMS through grant funding. So, that's one of the big things that a lot of places will say is, hey, we're not going to do this because I don't have the money to fund it. Hey, that's great. I'm interested. Would you care if I found the funding? And if I found the funding, it doesn't cost you all anything, are we good to go? Because some of those grants will also backfill for employees, and, you make it. So advocate, and, we're pushing our training, our patient care forward by getting us all together, and we all start to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. That's how we operate as the task force. Is the city, there's a couple of bigger surrounding cities in the capital district of New York, Albany being the capital, and the career departments provide provide the rescuers, and the task force trains them. In exchange, the city gets backfilled. They get paid for whatever overtime or position it generates, and in return, they get more skilled rescuers that otherwise they may not have the funding to pay for people to go to all these classes. So,
and that kind of ties into the follow on, because the secondary objection, or one of those things that we were talking about earlier, is access to the personal protective equipment, or the equipment that goes along with that, and say, hey, throughout this is, I'm going to train and be prepared for this, but also going to look at ways to help to equip our services as well. Because, here's the big thing is, a lot of these agencies are looking for it's a coupling between providing the services for, and then being able to recoup costs that are associated with purchasing those equipment. So it may be that find grants for training, but you also have to find grants for equipment. But ultimately, when we see this, as I think all of this could be related back to one easy number: pushing that education forward to help the patients, just like we've done for years with CPR, educating the community. We know that if we can get a bystander start CPR, that is really what provides that chance for return of circulation. It's not getting us there because we've got a certain amount of time. It's pushing that forward to the community and saying, hey, you see somebody down, you do this, that's what's going to keep them alive. And so we translate that to the rescue side.
Yeah, absolutely. And rescue will, hopefully always still be a low frequency event. It's not something that we're out there running every single day, but when we do have to run it, it tends to be a higher profile event. And honestly, these days, a concern of municipalities should be, social media and people videoing and saying, hey, how come your department's not prepared for this? And, how come you had to call in, 3 other neighboring departments, and the buck's gonna, drop, and the mayor's going to go to the chief, and and ultimately they're going to answer for that. Somebody's going to have to answer for it. And, if that's the pressure that we have to put on people, well, maybe that's the route to go. We don't want to be unprepared. We don't want to be that department that shows up and can't do anything for somebody. Because, these days, Facebook Live and YouTube and whatnot, if you show up to a scene and say, there's nothing we can do, we need to call somebody else, it's going to be on the internet.
All right, let's go ahead and start to wrap up. We've talked a lot tonight about rescue. So, Doug, I want to give you an opportunity to just kind of give your final thoughts, help individuals that are looking to make this pitch to their leadership. Really anything that you think our members should know, that our listeners know that they may not have received from us yet.
Sure. I mean, there's a lot to rescue medicine. It's not just treating people in small enclosed areas. There's things like the old dogma of we don't give lactated ringers to people who are hyperkalemic. Well, we've actually proven that that's acceptable and actually more beneficial, especially when we're talking in terms of crush injuries. Our first line fluid resuscitation for crushed patients is lactated ringers. And but it contains potassium. Well, it contains 4 milliequivalents per liter, which is less than somebody who's hyperkalemic. So yes, lactated ringers is okay. You're not going to make them more hyperkalemic. You could actually potentially bring it down because of gradients and how much we're infusing. So there's a lot of information, and that really kind of highlights the need for specially trained people. And again, 25 years ago, what was a tactical paramedic? 15 years ago, what was a community paramedic? Hopefully, 15 years from now, we'll have actual dedicated rescue paramedics, even with some of these agencies that don't really do rescue.
Well, all great points there. I'm going to go over to Bradley Dean for his final thoughts on today's episode.
I was going to say, if you're a paramedic and you can at least get to the operations level in some of those, if you're interested in rescue, I would really encourage you to do it. Regardless of what state you're in, where you are, there are plenty of courses that are being offered. You may have to travel for some, but work with your agency and talk to them, because at some point you're going to have an incident where you would be beneficial.
And Eric.
One of my favorite things that we had the opportunity to do when I was teaching an EMT and AMT program, one of the instructors was a firefighter/captain, and he had every rescue thing. And he did an intro to just like, here's how some ropes work. Here's intro to water and stuff. And we got our students out in nature and the environment a little bit. So if you're an instructor, you might want to consider partnering just so that they get at least exposed at that base level. And then beyond that, they can move into whatever professional capacity they want to do it, even if it's like you said, at the operations or the technical level.
Thank you for that, Eric. And I take a look at this as Doug was mentioning, the change or the shift in lactated ringers, and we go back and you got verapamil, and we've got all these that have been in favor. We're the end all be all. You can't do medicine without this. Then they fell out of favor, and then they're like, oh no, you're going to absolutely kill somebody. And then the next thing you turn around and they're back on the upswing. And yeah, really, we need to incorporate this. And this really is about the practice of medicine. And the idea behind all of this is we still want to remain safe. And so we do all of this. So you heard a lot about the training side and the equipping side. But this is now saying, hey, we've got to a safe spot, and we can push forward our medicine so that we save a few minutes. We make sure that they're getting what they need. They're breathing, they're circulating, and all of this stuff can go forth and keep the patient alive while they do get out of that situation and subsequently to the trauma center or the hospital of choice. So this is just a shift, and hopefully this kind of starts a grassroots movement, continued education. Bradley mentioned paramedic, but really, depending on where you are, especially in some of the rural communities, EMTs and advanced EMTs may be the ones that are pushing and pursuing this. And so we want to say, hey, have those conversations. If you need to, reach out to Doug or any of us and let us know. I've spent years, as all of us, as vehicle rescue and hazmat and level ropes or rescue awareness. And we've all been there and kind of done it, and you kind of see those shifts or that adaptation. So, Doug, on behalf of our crew here, definitely want to say thank you for coming on and recording this episode with us. It's hopefully very thought provoking for some of our listeners and gets that shift because I like it. We've all kind of heard when the active shooter mentality changed and we start pressing forward. They're like, it's not safe. I can't go in. Like, yeah, but they're dying. And if we would just push forward slightly, then those are going to change. So, sir, thank you for coming on tonight and passing on all that information.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
All right. And for everybody else, we always like to hear what you're thinking. So make sure and go forth and go to any of our podcast platforms with Jim's. Make sure to subscribe, rate, and review so you get our information. But for us, you can also go to our website at emshandoff.com and get a hold of any of us, as well as you'll see the challenges that Eric are posting regularly